Okay, so I think we can start now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Careers in Ornithology and Avian Conservation Outside the Academy. I'm Vale Ferretti, and I'm president of the Association of Field Ornithologists.
And I'm Tim O'Connell. I'm president of the Wilson Ornithological Society. And today's discussion is the first in a series of events we're going to have as our societies work together to try to do better mentoring for folks interested in developing careers in ornithology.
We welcome all of you joining us live on Zoom and everyone following along on YouTube. The event will also be recorded and archived on the YouTube channel, the AFO YouTube channel. And we thank for their technical assistance in developing the program and making it happen, Jess Hightower, Jen Smith, and Matt Schumer.
And we're really grateful to the panel of ornithologists we have who have taken some time out of their schedules today, and they're here to share some of their wisdom with all of you. We're delighted to have you here. And to get started, I'd like to introduce our host and our moderator, Dr. Auriel Fournier.
Hello, everyone. Really great to see you all this evening, and thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Our goal today is to spend some time hearing from folks who have a really great diversity of jobs within ornithology and avian conservation, so that everyone who's listening can learn a little bit more about what those jobs are like, what the actual day-to-day life of someone in that position looks like, what people like about their jobs, what they find challenging and rewarding, and then also have some time to answer some questions. So the format we're going to go with today is that each of the panelists is going to have a maximum of 5 minutes to talk with us a little bit about their current position. And then after that, we have a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time that we're going to go through. And then if we fly through all of that, we'll have time for some live question and answer at the end. We're going to work through our panelists alphabetically by last name for lack of a better way to do things. And so we're going to start this evening with Rob Aldridge. Rob, would you like to start us off?
Yes, I would. Can you guys, there you go, you see me. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm actually on the road, so I'm not on the road. I'm in a parking lot, but I'm not at my house and not sitting in front of a actual computer screen. But my name is Rob Aldridge. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I actually work in a part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service called the Ecological Services. So it's mainly a branch that's associated with regulatory work, so biological opinions to help with the Endangered Species Act, and also recovery and classification. I actually work in a piece of ecological services that is fairly unique. I work as part of the Florida Air Force partnership. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently made a partnership with the U.S. Air Force, and we help them with their threatened endangered species monitoring and management. So we were asked to give some information, including like what our regular day-to-day kind of looks like. I will say that mine is really variable. More and more, I'm getting into a lot of administrative duties. This is mostly because for personal reasons, I moved away from the Air Force installation where I work. My wife got into vet school, and so the Air Force and the service just allowed me to move away from that installation. And so I'm no longer able to do field work. So a lot of times in ecological services, people mostly work at a desk and push paper, do paperwork. I had a rare position in the Air Force partnership that I could go out and do a lot of field work. But when I moved, that no longer is the case. And now I'm stuck to doing a lot of administrative duties. I actually oversee 5 going on 6 biologists across 3 different Air Force installations and all of the threatened and endangered species monitoring they do. We're broader than just birds. So we've got birds, we do some stuff with mammals and some herps. So my job, although I'm mostly a trained ornithologist, or I've worked with birds much of my life, I've actually branched out and worked with a bunch of different taxa. My job makes me think about and analyze data associated with recovery. So our jobs are really focused on recovery because we want the Air Force to reach recovery goals so that they can have some regulatory flexibility. So a lot of my thinking and a lot of my data analysis is how can we get the Air Force on those installations up to and beyond recovery goals that are for those particular installations. As I said, I do a lot of regulatory work. So we do biological opinions, where biological opinions are when you have an action that might impact a threatened and endangered species, you've got to do an analysis to see how that's going to impact it. And it's not going to jeopardize the continued existence of that species or critically modify the critical habitat or adversely modify the critical habitat for that species. Once again, I said I could be doing field work, but since I moved, I do a lot of administrative work. The main responsibilities that I have are to kind of oversee the monitoring and management. So I look at it from kind of 30,000 foot level. I've got a series of GS11 and GS9 employees that work underneath me, and they do a lot of the field work. They also do a lot of the data entry and data analysis and other things. It's kind of like setting up my own lab, which is pretty unique within the ecological services. So what parts of my job do I enjoy? I enjoy almost everything. I like the challenge of thinking about recovery of teeny species, especially with limited data. So we're working on threatened and endangered species, so we often don't have a lot of information. And I like trying to figure out how to analyze things with sparse amounts of data. I love the challenge of working with an agency whose mission is not recovery. So thinking about how I can take our mission and fold it into their mission to make the Department of Defense or the Air Force and the Space Force actually want to work towards recovery. I really enjoy that challenge. And I like working with cooperators. So cooperators both on the end of the funders, the DoD that fund us, and cooperative agreements. We set up cooperative agreements with people that help us with threatened and endangered species monitoring and management, like private institutions like Archbold Biological Station. So parts of the job I find rewarding are kind of recovery successes. So when we do have successes in recovery, we recently met and surpassed our recovery goal for the red cockaded woodpecker, and we're working towards recovery goals for the Florida grasshopper sparrow. Skills that I had used that I didn't receive formal training is administrative work. Administrative work is a hard nut to crack, and I'm slowly learning how to do it, and how to communicate with different stakeholders. So I have a bunch of, funders, fundees, all kinds of things, all kinds of people that I'm talking with. And I wish I would have learned more about how to work with people with way different mindsets than people in academia. And lastly, what do I wish I'd known about jobs like yours? That they exist. I didn't realize how rewarding this job could be. And I spent a lot of my career doing basic research. And I wish I would have known how awesome it is to work on kind of applied work. So I think that's it for my intro.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's great. Next up, we're going to have David Kursell. So David, would you like to take a few minutes and tell us about your position?
Sure. Thanks, Auriel. First, my position has a lot to do with figuring out how to do IT when it comes to the digital world, which I'm not very good at. But I'm a part owner and a senior vice president in an environmental and engineering consulting firm based out of Arizona. It's called Westland Resources, Inc. And I head up the West region for that company. I'm based out of Portland, Oregon right now. And I'm opening up some offices in Washington and Nevada. And I came directly out of my PhD into consulting, which was a bit of a jar for me. Consulting world is very diverse, but I knew nothing about it in graduate school. And what my job is to help my clients get permits and walk through environmental permitting processes to build their projects. And a lot of what I do, I'm an expert in, is I'm glad I'm going after Rob, is to deal with the Endangered Species Act, get through biological opinions, get through the environmental impact statements that have to happen for projects that have an agency component, a federal agency component in them. So there's a whole slew of regulatory processes that I help clients with. What I also am responsible in my job, and I think Rob also hit on this too, is things that I was never trained for in graduate school, in particular of how to manage people. You know, at one point I've had 50 direct reports, and how to keep them busy, keep them in health insurance, and go get the money to do that. And so a large part of my job is to go get money to keep people busy and keep people in jobs, and to make sure that those clients are happy and the projects are continuing to work. And that's something that managing people and getting loads of money, a lot more than you would think from a research side of things, is not, it's a different type of skill set. We don't, it's not grant applications to go to the NIH or NSF. It's relationship building with clients, with agency personnel, so that you can sell your brain. At the end of the day, we're selling our brain to get through permitting processes. So I have a lot of flexibility in my job right now to go after the types of projects and the clients that I feel interested in. My thoughts on skill set for that, whether you need a master's or a PhD, I've been asked that question many times, and to me, it's much less about the degree level and much more about how you approach problems, understanding that you need to question all of your assumptions. Outside of an academic world, the types of questions and value sets and stakeholder questions you're getting are completely different, and not as structured. And so being able to adapt from an extremely structured world to bring that knowledge and talk about it in a value set world with various stakeholders. So to me, it doesn't matter if you have master's or PhD, it matters what experience you have in that, how interested you are in that, and how easy it is for you to question yourself, because you got to question yourself all the time. Some good places to start looking for these. There's in the marketplace right now. Everybody is looking. I had a firm of about 175 people, and we have 30 job openings. Some of that is people, particularly coming out of academics, not being exposed to that opportunity. But also it's a very different world than a lot of us were used to. And that can be intimidating. It can also be something that folks go into and then don't like it. But most of Indeed's or the professional associations, particularly the professional associations, from industry level or from there are planning associations and environmental planning associations, et cetera. There's a lot of jobs posted on there. So I don't want to take up too much time, Auriel, but that basically is my quick little introduction, and feel free to ask questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. Next up, we have Andrew Cox.
My name is Andrew Cox. I work for Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, which is Florida's state wildlife agency, and we have a big agency. I'm in the science division, and I am responsible for the group of people that does monitoring and research related to important game and non-game species. And in Florida, unlike many states, the vast majority of our focus is actually on non-game species. So what does that look like from a day-to-day? Since I am the lead for our group of people, there is a lot of administration, as folks have talked to. You got to keep the airboats running, keep the trucks running, and things like that. There's personnel management. That stuff's kind of the boring stuff. It's the stuff that you do to allow you to do some of the stuff that you were trained to do. So I do a lot of science oversight and implementation. So that's reading grants, writing grants, reading manuscripts, helping staff make their work better. A lot of conservation planning and implementation. So helping write state management plans or response plans to for example, large mortality events for birds or things like that. And then we do a fair amount of outreach and service as well as part of our job, because we think that that does contribute to recovery. Day to day, as a sort of half administrator and half scientist, I do spend a lot of time behind the computer. I spend a lot of time meeting and talking, more than probably I ever knew was possible. A lot of time reading and writing, just like it was in graduate school. But I also do have a position that affords me the opportunity to get out into the field infrequently but regularly, and those are of course very rewarding moments in one's career, especially as you get older. So what do I enjoy about my job? There's a lot I enjoy, but I think I still really love getting out in the field, and I sometimes can't believe how fortunate I am to get paid to count or hold a bird. That still strikes me as remarkably lucky. The other thing I really find rewarding about my job is that I know that there have been times since I've been working for Florida Fish and Wildlife that I've put birds on this planet that would not otherwise exist. Things we have done have grown bird populations or protected them. And that was my motivation to get into the field that I'm in. And I think it can probably vary by state agency, but I think state agencies are a great place for people who are interested in moving the conservation needle to do just that. Skills that I did not get in school, they have very little to do with science or our natural resources, because I think graduate schools do a really good job training us to be scientists and training us to be natural historians and to understand the interplay between those two things. So I will sort of second what some folks have said already, which is that graduate school did very little for me in terms of people management, very little in terms of stakeholder engagement, which cannot understate how important that part of our job is. Conflict resolution, and then you spend a lot of conservation occurs in meeting rooms. A remarkable amount, and meeting management facilitation is a really important skill that if you can find a way to get, I highly recommend it. The last thing that we were asked is what do I wish I knew in advance? I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. I think I understood that this was a field that was sort of defined by lower than average pay and difficult job prospects. And so none of that sort of scared me away, and it shouldn't scare you away either, because there's some really rewarding positions. But it does mean that sometimes advancement can be difficult because there's so many really talented people in our field. And it does mean that even things like changing geography can be challenging, because you develop a skill set that's really sometimes pretty particular to where you are, and transporting that elsewhere, if you've got some wanderlust like me, that can be hard. But I wouldn't let that dissuade me from entering this field, that's for sure.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up, we have Jenny.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jenny Duberstein. My pronouns are she, her, and I am coming to you today from the unceded homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui, also known as Tucson, Arizona, where I coordinate a binational bird conservation partnership called the Sonoran Joint Venture. And our mission is to conserve the unique birds and habitats of the southwestern US and northwest Mexico. And so our region includes all or part of 9 states in the United States and Mexico, 2 countries, a lot of different tribes, and more than 745 species of birds that either migrate through, winter in, or breed in the Sonoran Joint Venture region. And when people ask me, to describe what my job is as the coordinator, that's my title. I'm the director of this program. I'm one of 23 migratory bird joint ventures across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. There are 2 of us that are binational with Mexico. And we bring together public and private partners. So we bring together federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, academia, industry partners, private landowners, tribes, to work together to decide on priorities and to address bird and habitat conservation issues that are too big for any one organization, any one state, in many cases, any one country to take on by themselves. So we provide a place where people can come together, meet each other, connect, and figure out how to work together. So when I try to sum up my job in 3 words, I say that I'm a conservation matchmaker. And my job is to know a little bit, or in some cases a lot, about what everybody's doing in this region that I work in the Southwest US and Northwest Mexico, and do what I can to help facilitate communication, to promote collaboration between different partners on the ground, to help coordinate things for people, and to provide support in a lot of different ways. It might be facilitating a meeting, it might be providing training. We have a small grants program, so it might be providing funding. It might just be saying, oh, you're studying yellow-billed cuckoos in Arizona, you should talk to this person who's studying yellow-billed cuckoos in Sonora, and maybe I can help you with that conversation. Putting people in touch with each other who perhaps otherwise wouldn't be in touch with each other. My day-to-day work, I do spend a lot of time in front of the computer, especially since the pandemic started. But yeah, I do a lot of coordination and planning, conservation planning. I supervise 2 staff. It's a small program, so there's 3 of us, and we all do, honestly, a little bit of everything. We support work that's like habitat restoration and protection, bird monitoring, strategic communications and education and outreach, capacity building, ecotourism as a conservation tool, research where it's needed to fill gaps in our knowledge about bird and habitats, conservation, social science, human dimensions. So there's just like a lot of things in the universe of what we can do and what we are working on. So in addition to that, I am an employee of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I work for the migratory bird program of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And no shade to our previous speaker, but I think I personally have the best job in the Fish and Wildlife Service because I have all the benefits that come along with being a federal employee, although there are some headaches that come along with being a federal employee also, but I get to do it. This Northern Joint Venture in a lot of ways functions more like a nonprofit because we have this public-private partnership. And so it's just, I have a lot of freedom and flexibility together with my board. I have a board of directors to decide the direction that we want to focus on, the things that we want to do, and what our priorities are. And we get to work together with our partners to do all of that. The things, I don't know that I have much to add. The things that I didn't get trained in, I have my undergraduate degrees in wildlife biology, and then I have a master's and my PhD that are in conservation social science. And one thing I wish I had known about a job like mine when I was finishing, especially my undergraduate degree, was that conservation social science even existed. I had no idea that it was even a field. And I think conservation is about behavior, and in looking at it through the lens of birds, we're usually not trying to change bird behavior. When we're thinking about conservation, we're trying to change human behavior. And I think all of those things that people mentioned about, learning to build partnerships, learning to build relationships, how do you manage people, how do you facilitate discussions and meetings and planning processes, these are things that I did not receive formal training in and that I use regularly, daily in my job, and that would have been really good skills to have been trained in. Let's see. Yeah, maybe I'll stop right there and pass the microphone to the next person and be happy to answer any more questions that people have.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Eula, you are up next.
Great. Thanks, and hi everyone. My name is Eula Kapitanakos. I also work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I am in their International Affairs program, which is based out of the Fish and Wildlife Service headquarters, and that's in Falls Church, Virginia. For those of you who aren't familiar with the international side of Fish and Wildlife Service, there's 3 main divisions. The IA program, International Affairs program, houses the 2 CITES authorities. So the Scientific Authority and the Management Authority for CITES. So International Affairs is responsible for the policy and the regulatory side of CITES. And then there's also the Division of International Conservation, and that's more of our financial assistance side. We have funds that are congressionally mandated for the conservation of specific taxa and species. So things like the elephant funds for both Asian and African elephants. We have tiger funds, great ape funds, marine turtle funds, rhino, tiger, and so on. And my branch, we're a small little tight-knit branch of about 6 people. We're located for now within the Division of Management Authority, and we're the only threats-based program in international affairs. And the name of the program is the Combating Wildlife Trafficking Strategies and Partnership branch. So the threat that we deal with specifically is the illegal trade in wildlife. And so the aim of our branch, of the CWT branch, is to cut across both the international conservation side through the financial assistance side, but then also the policy work that's done through CITES, as well as other policies associated with the illegal trade in wildlife, like the End, Neutralize, and Disrupt Wildlife Trafficking Act, and so on. I am a program officer, and that means that I manage both grants and cooperative agreements. So grants are basically when you fund partners to do the work that they do on the ground, and then cooperative agreements have a significant more investment, or more, how to put it, we significantly contribute more to the development of each of these projects, and they tend to be a little bit longer, maybe up to 5 years or so. So our work is broader as well. We don't just work on birds, we work on all taxa, and my branch specifically works on taxa that fall out of the financial assistance that's provided through the Multinational Species Award. So we tend to work on things like birds or reptiles and amphibians, pangolins, things that aren't covered by those larger congressionally mandated grants. My day-to-day, so I spend a lot of time developing partnerships, working with people all over the world, both governments and NGOs. Partnerships are at the crux of our work. So we have to develop these strong partnerships in order to do the work that we do. We work a lot with law enforcement. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also has a law enforcement program that has both a domestic and international scope. Law enforcement has international attaches, which are based around the globe, and so we'll partner with them heavily in the projects that we implement. So that's part of it, and then I'm also involved in the policy side. So when the CITES meetings come around, we'll typically help develop position papers, US position papers for things that are associated with the illegal trade. And so there's a lot of writing that's involved with that. But mostly I'm on the program side. And some of the things that I really love about my job, I love that it's international in scope. I learn something new about cultures every single day. I love helping to develop these international partnerships with governments and NGOs. I really like working at this higher level as well as on the ground, so really getting to know our project partners well. I love working on a diversity of problems, and I'm a problem solver by nature. So I love applying strategic planning techniques and systems thinking approaches to the work that we do. I also love that we work with our partners to help build longer term capacity. So it's not just about going in and trying to solve one specific threat at a time, but we try to help countries develop their own ability to manage and combat wildlife trafficking. I also love my team. Very important to love the people who you work with. We're a really small, cohesive team, and we worked really hard to grow the skills to work well together. I also love working in a field that aligns with my values and working with a diversity of species. So even though my background is in birds of prey, I'm working with mammals and other bird species. So there's lots of learning opportunities there, which is great. What are the kinds of skills that I use in my job that I didn't get formal training in? And what do I wish that I had known about jobs like mine when I was a student? So I would say there are lots of things that I wish I had focused more on during my academic days, including negotiation and communication skills, and not just working with folks that think like me, but working with people who may have different values, different cultures, and so on. Learning how to build teams is very important. There are a lot of skills that going into team building, and so I wish I had taken more opportunity to learn about that. I wish I learned more about how global policy operates. So I knew a lot about the domestic work, but not necessarily understanding policy at this global sphere. I also wish, like my colleague just described, that I had a lot more exposure to social science. So like she mentioned, understanding the human dimensions of conservation is conservation in a nutshell. And, from a combating wildlife trafficking perspective, in order to reduce the threat of trafficking, you really have to understand where the demand is coming from, but also understanding why people are poaching animals in the wild to begin with. And I think that's about it. I think I'm going to stop there for now. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Yula. Sarah, you are up next.
Okay. Boy, this is really cool listening to all these other people talk about their jobs, because I feel like there's a lot of common themes that all of us are bringing up, and I'm going to add to that. Currently I work for Erie Bird Observatory, a very small nonprofit. So I guess I am representing the nonprofit sector here today. I used to work for National Audubon Society for a number of years, but now I have a much smaller organization. So I have a microscopic organization. So within the nonprofit sector, I would say that there are more bird organizations than there are, say, mammal or herp organizations out there. And so birding and bird science, bird conservation, there's more potential jobs with ornithology than with some of the other sort of sciences specialties. So I guess what I am going to, one thing about the nonprofit world is very mission driven. And so to go into the nonprofit world, you really do have to understand that you're not going to be as well paid as in the agency world. The agency world, I think, gets more money than other fields, even though they may not feel like it. But the nonprofit world, you're definitely not as well paid, but you're doing work that is very satisfying. And I think a lot of people who work within the nonprofit sector really feel strongly about the importance of the work and the significance of the work, and that it's important to do that. And so it is a sort of a mission-driven type of sector. It is private money for the most part, but then we also do a lot of contracting and grant work. And so I have worked with joint ventures. I have worked with a number of the other people. I have state contracts. I have, we work with endangered species. So I guess my work is more on some of the on the ground work, interfacing and participating in some of these planning efforts that other people have talked about, and try to bring those planning efforts to fruition in a regional landscape setting, so that, I truly do believe that conservation is regional and local. You know, it's like all politics is local, or whatever that saying used to be. I do think that conservation is all local. It has to hit the ground somewhere and be implemented. And so that to me is an important aspect of it. And that often does happen with local nonprofits, local chapters of Audubon societies, local organizations. Land trusts are really important at making things happen at a local scale. And that you can do a lot of big planning and policy. Well, of course, policy work kind of has to be at a bigger scale, but a lot of real conservation work is at the local scale. So I do think it's important. There are a huge range of sizes of nonprofit or non-governmental organizations. So there's some very big international conservation organizations like the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, national level ones, National Audubon Society, American Bird Conservancy, international ones in just with birds. BirdLife International is a big one. But then they go all the way down to what the kind of group that I'm with now, which is a very local one. So there's a giant range. The job prospects for being an actual straight scientist, you're only going to find a real science position at the very largest of the big organizations. The rest of them, it's all going to be a mix and match of doing science plus education, science plus administration, science plus fundraising. I would say in my case, I do all of the above. I have a really small organization, so I wear all the hats, and I hire in separate people who have particular skill sets to do primarily seasonal monitoring work for different projects. So my day-to-day work really involves fundraising, bringing the money in the door to try to achieve specific projects on the ground at this local level. And so we do a lot of monitoring and trying to do engagement with people to do some of that conservation work that is changing the behavior of people. And so that is the kind of work, the kind of programs we're doing. That's my responsibility, to bring the money in the door, make the programs happen, find the right people to do specific jobs that I can't, because I can't do everything myself. And then it's kind of a never-ending thing, but it's very satisfying. There is a lot of problem solving involved. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of talking to people, and I do a lot of grant writing, and then just plain fundraising, asking people for money directly. Will you support my Modus sensor station? Please give me $1,000 to buy a sensor station with, that kind of thing. That is something that the nonprofit world does. You have to ask people for money, but you also have to inspire them to want you to give them the money, because people are inspired. They want to help. And so you are helping people express their values when you give them the opportunity to donate to your organization like that. So I would say that my main responsibility is bringing in the money and making programs happen. Part I enjoy doing that, actually. I don't mind asking for money. I don't mind writing grants, bringing in, trying to, really think of inspiring projects and programs that will engage people to want to do a lights out program or something like that. The skills that I wish I'd learned in school but didn't, I would say all of the stuff everybody's mentioned already. All the people management work is really important. I will say I did in high school. I learned how to facilitate meetings, and I went to an unusual high school, but I learned how to facilitate meetings, and it has been one of the biggest skills I've used at every stage of my career, how to facilitate a meeting and run a meeting, be responsive and listening, but making it run. And that is something that is huge, really, really important type of skill. Communication skills are really, really essential. Written, spoken, all forms of communication. Really important to be able to communicate and your vision, communicate the needs, communicate what's needs to happen to the people you're managing. Really important. Trying to think of, I think that's about it. I'll leave the rest for questions, but the nonprofit sector is really big, particularly for birds. And I would say that to work towards a career in the nonprofit sector, you need to diversify your skill sets to be able to do more different things, because in a nonprofit, typically there aren't, everybody has to do a little of everything, it seems like. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, and Scott, would you like to take a few minutes and tell us about your job?
Sure. My name is Scott Stolson. I'm a research wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service's Research and Development Branch, which consists of 7 research stations, which are basically regions, and 81 experimental forests and range across the country. It employs 400 odd scientists nationally in various disciplines, not just wildlife, but forestry, social sciences, economics, engineering. I work at one of 23 labs making up the Northern Research Station, which is basically all the Forest Service research from Minnesota to Missouri to Maine to Maryland, the 4 M's. And I'm located about an hour east of Sarah. My work here is focused primarily on studying migratory birds and raptors at both the species and community levels in relation to things like forest management, climate change, and invasive species. My day-to-day job varies through the season. I try to maximize the amount of field work I do, but I devise research studies to answer specific questions based on current literature and also the needs and interests of landowners that the Forest Service interacts with, which includes federal, state, industrial, and non-industrial private landowners. I conduct and supervise the field work, analyze data, and write up and publish the results, mostly in peer-reviewed literature. In a lot of ways, my job is probably closest to academia of anybody of these non-academic jobs that have been talked about so far, except that I do research full-time. A major part of the work in Forest Service R&D is tech transfer, so we are encouraged to disseminate our research results as much as possible through conferences, webinars, consultations with landowners, and in my lab, through annual training sessions on sustainable forestry, which are mandatory for all the foresters employed by the state of Pennsylvania, although it's much broader than that. A lot of people come to those. In terms of the most rewarding part of my job, even though I chose a career that was a non-academic pathway, I found the most rewarding part of my job has been mentoring graduate and even undergraduate students. I work with a lot of them. I serve on graduate committees. In federal research, scientists are strongly encouraged to make connections with universities, including working with grad students, serving on committees, and becoming adjunct professors. For example, I hold an adjunct professorship at West Virginia University. I'm currently working with 3 graduate students there on various projects. In terms of the most fun, definitely the field work. I have been told by previous boss I should spend less time in the field and more time indoors writing papers and things. But when studying birds, there's stuff to look at almost all year round, starting with spring migration, breeding season, fall migration, saw-whet owl stuff, goshawks in the winter. I mean, if I could get away with it, I'd be in the field year round. The other thing that's really fun is because there's such a strong emphasis on tech transfer and disseminating research results, I get paid to attend ornithological conferences, going places like Valentina's home country of Argentina, beautiful place, Veracruz, Mexico, Nova Scotia. In terms of skills that need in the job, I think my training was pretty full, pretty complete for things I need. The key skills needed are, number one, first and foremost, writing, being able to write clearly, concisely, and rapidly. That's hard to overemphasize. Second most important are analytical skills, from study design to statistical analysis of data. I would add that strong organizational skills are essential as well, although that may have more to do with inherent abilities and training. The things I wish I knew about jobs like mine when I was a student, I wish I had learned more about training and obtaining. I'd been trained more in obtaining and managing grants, especially in recent years with federal budgets the way they are shrinking. We do depend more and more on obtaining grants to do any large scale research. And I had no training in that. I wish I'd been more aware of the availability of federal research jobs and how to find them, because they aren't easy to find unless you know where to look. I guess that's all I have at the moment.
Thank you so much, Scott. So we have 4 questions that were submitted ahead of time that we're going to start with. And so I'm going to ask the question, and then if the panelists would like to respond to that particular question, I'm going to ask that they use the raise hand feature so we can tell who wants to speak, since I'm guessing not everyone will answer every question, but maybe you will all be really chatty. We'll just see. So the one that we're going to start with is, how much of what you do in your job is determined by you versus assigned to you? So basically, how much autonomy do you have in your work in your current position? Scott, go ahead and start. Thanks.
Sure. In my position, it kind of depends upon the unit, because each research unit has a mission statement. But within the confines of that unit, it's pretty much completely autonomous. In my particular case, I work with a bunch of plant ecologists, plant pathologists, and silviculturists who all deal with plants. They don't know anything about wildlife. So basically, I have free reign to do whatever I want, which I kind of like.
That does sound very fun. Yeah. Anyone else interested in chiming in on that question? Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I also have pretty free reign to do what I want. I do have a board of directors, and so big picture things, absolutely, I need their support. I have a supervisor at our Fish and Wildlife Service regional office, so there are definitely things where I need their support, but both my board and my supervisor, you know, are quite open to following the lead of the things that I want to work in, and I appreciate that a lot about my job.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Andrew?
I'll chime in just because I can sort of contrast with those responses, which is that at least within our state agency, we work very closely with the managers within the agency and the managers outside the agency to prioritize our work, to identify the research and monitoring needs that are the highest priority. There's very little room for pet projects that fall outside of those high priority needs that we've identified. I don't view it as a negative, really, because the whole process does make me feel like I'm working on the most important things for Florida's birds. But it's a constraint for sure. There's less flexibility at the state level.
David.
Yeah, so in my industry, we hire folks who can work autonomously and can go get their own money and deal with the problems and the projects by themselves. That one of the key things we focus on is, can you work by yourself and get these things done and support a bunch of people, et cetera. So it is a key trait that we actually select on.
That makes good sense. Excellent. Rob, go ahead.
I'd say mine is maybe I've got projects that I have to work on for the Air Force. I've got deliverables that me and the staff that I work with have to provide, but I have autonomy in how I kind of carry. Well, on some installations, I have total autonomy on how I can carry those out. On other installations, they micromanage how we do that a little bit more. So the employees that I work with at that installation have less autonomy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Our next question, and this is one that we got in a lot of different forms from folks who registered, but I kind of distilled it down into this one, which is, what are your thoughts on a master's versus a PhD for being competitive for a job similar to yours? Go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, I'm trying to hit things on my phone. It's kind of funky.
No problem.
I would say if you're talking about specifically for my job, a PhD might be helpful, right? I was able to enter the federal workforce as a GS-12, which is an upper level position, and I would have never been able to do that if I didn't have a PhD and at least a year of a postdoc. So that was necessary to enter federal service at my position. But one thing I will say is that, it took me 6 years to get a PhD, and I could probably have been gone with my master's degree and gotten in the workforce and climbed the ladder just as quickly, if not quicker, without a PhD. So I don't think a PhD is necessary unless you're, you want to enter the workforce at a higher grade and you want to get that experience.
Eula.
Yeah, I would say that it's not necessary to have a PhD in order to do the work that I do. But that being said, I did come into my position through a AAAS fellowship. And in order to be in that fellowship, you need to have had gotten your PhD. And also there is a very large percentage of the folks who work both in the CITES offices as well as in the Division of International Conservation who do have, who are the biologists, that is, because obviously there are other people who do other programmatic work, but at the biology level, the vast majority of them do have PhDs.
Excellent, thank you. Jenny.
Of all of the joint venture coordinators, I'm not sure how many of us have PhDs. I'm definitely one. There aren't that many that do. You do not by any means need a PhD to run a partnership like mine. A master's is probably helpful, but there are also a number of joint venture coordinators that have undergraduate degrees and are doing a great job with it. I think your skills and experience count for a lot more in my particular job.
Excellent. Scott.
My position in Forest Service research is considered a research grade scientist, and with rare exceptions, it requires a PhD to get into the field. People who don't have it can be very effective scientists, and I know a number of that do, but they work themselves up through the system. There are a lot of non-research grade scientists in the federal system, and most of those require only a master's or even an undergraduate degree.
Excellent. Andrew.
I think we don't look either way on whether it's a master's or a PhD, but I just want to add one thing to this conversation, which is that we tend to get a great number of applications per open position. And one way that we're able to differentiate, the quality of these people who are otherwise just a piece of paper to us, a CV, is whether they've published. So I would say, regardless of whether you've got the master's or the PhD, evidence of that ability to publish is really useful when you're looking for a job.
Thank you, Andrew. Sarah.
Yeah, I'd say for most nonprofits, I'd say no, PhD is definitely not needed. There are a few nonprofit organizations like National Audubon that have specific, their science department, they all have PhDs, I think. So there are a couple places for that in the nonprofit world, but I think in general, masters, having experience, being able to interact with people, there's a lot of other criteria that are more important.
Excellent. And then these next two questions I'm going to kind of put together. So the first part is, where are some good places to search for job opportunities within your organization? And do you have any specific advice to folks who might be applying to your organization or similar organizations on how to put together a competitive application? Anybody would like to comment on that? We'll start with David.
I think I jumped the gun on my intro with some of these. My apologies. But as I was listening to everybody else talk, you know, in my industry, combining a biological training or scientific training with either like Jenny, social sciences, or in my part, law, showing some knowledge and interest in law and regulation is a way to show us that you're interested in combining your training into other things and fitting in kind of the work that we go for. I would say that for context, when I talk to some of my colleagues and competitors, one of the things that they have concerns about particularly with PhDs coming out of grad school, is that the tendency to not be able to think outside of the scientific method box. And some people can do that and some people can't. But the folks that can and take that skill set and that thought process and that logic and the structured thinking to something outside the scientific process are ones that are very successful.
Excellent. Jenny.
So federal jobs, I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, so federal jobs are all posted on USA Jobs. They can also be posted on things like sometimes on the Texas A&M job site and various things like that. Reaching out to people, just sort of being in the loop, especially, you know, people that have the kinds of jobs that you're interested in having, can be a good way to find out about upcoming federal vacancies. I won't say too much because I can see there's a couple of their Fish and Wildlife Service people with their hands raised, but the federal hiring process is notoriously convoluted and full of barriers and biases and things that some of us are working really hard to eliminate. Yeah, I won't dig too much into that, but one piece of advice that I always give everybody applying for a federal job is find out what job series you are applying for. So if you are applying to be a wildlife biologist, that's the 486 job series. You can Google what are the requirements, the education requirements for a 486 wildlife biologist, and it will tell you, you know, you need this many hours of biology, you need this many hours of botany, you need this many hours of XYZ things, statistics. And in addition to your transcripts, which you will have to provide, go through your transcripts and put together another sheet that tells the person reviewing your application which classes, like these are my 6 classes with the exact names, the way they appear on your transcript. These are the classes that are biology. These are the classes that are botany, because there is no guarantee that a wildlife biologist is going to be the one reviewing your application. And they might look at a class like island biogeography and not recognize that as a biology class, for example. And so that can be a really easy and unfortunate way that otherwise really qualified applicants can slip through the cracks right at the beginning of the process.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Scott.
I want to reiterate what Jenny said. That was very good. And something I'd recommend for people interested in trying to get into the federal system, and it is very convoluted. One of the first things you need to know is that the first review of applicants is done by some nameless bureaucrat in human resources somewhere who almost certainly has no knowledge of what biology is or what's involved in the job as an ornithologist. So they'll go through your application, just check off keywords, buzzwords, or whatever that they key in on. So if you apply, include as many of the keywords used in the job announcement as you can without outright fabrication. You know, so if it calls for bird banding experience, if you've attended a bird banding session as an observer, say limited experience with bird banding, something like that. And whatever position you're interested in, assume scientific writing and public speaking will be major components of the job. So gain as much experience as you can.
Thank you, Scott. Rob.
I would echo what Scott and I'm drawing a blank at Jenny said, I would echo what they said about the federal process. One thing that I would also add or suggest is a lot of times you have to answer questions on what they call KSAs, or knowledge, skills, and abilities. And you have to rate yourself anywhere from 1 to 5, 5 being that you're an expert in the field, and 1 being that you don't know anything, you've never even seen it. I always try to encourage people to figure out ways, be honest on your application, but figure out ways to get yourself to 4 or 5, because that might be the only way that you'll be eligible for a position. And when sometimes they ask questions, but try to think outside questions. For example, if they ask knowledge about writing a biological opinion, you may have never written a biological opinion before, but you may have worked on a biological assessment or worked on components of a biological opinion. I would use that as your expertise. So a lot of times they make the reference, although you haven't, somebody's asking you to bake brownies, you've never baked brownies, but you bake cookies, and you know that baking cookies and baking brownies are very similar. And so think about it in that light, on your expertise for knowledge, skills, and abilities, but answer honestly. And if somebody asks you about it, be able to answer why you gave yourself a certain score.
Thank you, Rob. Eula.
So just totally agree with what Jenny, Scott, and Rob have said. And just to add that if you Google how to apply on USA Jobs or how to format your resume, because you have to format your resume in a very specific way for USA Jobs, just look online and you will find a large swath of resources available to help guide you through that. I also wanted to bring up two opportunities that are really good ways for finding out what positions are available within the federal government. And one is, and Violet posted this, is through the AAAS fellowship, which I mentioned, which I had gone through. It's a 2-year Science and Technology and Policy fellowship. And the other one is the Presidential Management Fellowship. And I put that link in there also. That's also a 2-year fellowship as well. And it gives you some really great opportunities to get exposure to what government agencies do. And there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of where you can get placed and so on. But both of those fellowships offer professional and leadership training courses and so on. So apart from just learning what the government's all about, you also get these added skills through these workshops that they provide.
Excellent. Yeah, Rob.
That reminded me that there's also a directorate fellowship program, which is another program held by, I think, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I think it's called Pathways Internship. I think you have to be a student for both of those. So you can get these internships or these opportunities while you're a student. And one of the benefits of them is then it allows you to have prioritized, I forget the actual name of it, but prioritize hiring. So you can like skip the public announcement and get hired as a service employee or kind of merit promotion type stuff. So those are other good opportunities you can use as students.
Thank you, Rob. And I also just want to kind of briefly cover what's been popping up in the chat, since I know that the folks watching on YouTube don't have access to the chat in the same way. So Andrew shared that all the state of Florida jobs can be found at jobs.myflorida.com. And in my experience, that's true for most state agencies, that their specific state website is the best place to go for those. Valentina shared the AAAS one, which is aaas.org/fellowships. Tim provided a link to Ornithology Exchange, which is a job board where lots of different organizations post. And if you Google Ornithology Exchange, you'll find that. Eula shared the PMF program, which is pmf.gov, and you can find more information there. And then the Texas A&M job board was also shared, which if you Google Texas A&M Wildlife Job Board, that'll pop up for you. So and there's some other there. You can also look for more information on the internship and fellowship programs that were just mentioned through Fish and Wildlife on the Fish and Wildlife website. And David shared the westlandresources.applicantpro.com/jobs website as well for places to look for jobs in consulting. So yeah. All right. Well, we are kind of at the point of wrapping up. We've covered a lot of ground. If folks have additional questions that they'd like to ask, we can certainly stay on a little longer, but I think some of our panelists probably need to jump pretty quickly. So I'd just like to take a moment before we maybe have some more informal question asking to thank our panelists for sharing their time with us. You guys all obviously have really busy day jobs, and we really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise and allowing everyone to learn a little bit more about all the amazing things that you get to do. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. I personally have to go, so I'm gonna sign off. Sorry, I can't stay a little bit longer, but thanks everyone for tuning in. And if you have any questions specifically for me or whatever, feel free to reach out and email me. I hope maybe they'll be able to offer email addresses for some of us.
Thank you, Rob.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
And I think with Scott, you're still here, Scott. We were discussing the idea of putting together a document to make it available about jobs in non-academic settings. So we might want to put all this information, the website links in that document. And so hopefully we will be able to have that available for everyone on our websites, both Wilson's website and AFO website.
Well, if anyone else has questions, you can either throw them in the chat or raise your hand and then ask the panelists your questions.
I don't know if there are any questions on YouTube.
I'm scrolling through and looking for those too, Valerie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another question that we got several times from folks who registered was, how did you figure out that you wanted to leave the academy career-wise when you finished whatever your terminal degree is? If any of you would like to answer that. Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I never wanted to be in the academy. So
there you go.
There was that. I was getting my master's degree, and as I was finishing my master's degree, I got hired to work as the education and outreach coordinator for the Sonoran Joint Venture, a job that I continued to hold while I was working on my PhD. And I knew that was the job I was going to have when I was done with my PhD. I was more interested in the project I was working on and the process. My master's degree was a little bit disappointing, the experience. And so I wanted a better graduate school experience. And so I got a PhD. Sort of a funny thing to say, but I never had any intention of staying in the academy.
Awesome. And David.
That's a great question. I would say very painfully would be my answer. I think I was in the middle of my PhD when I looked at pathways in the academy, and I said, "There's just no way I'm going to be happy doing that." But then you have no idea where to go, and that was a tough years. I still had 3-4 years left my PhD, and I told myself I was going to finish. I think my advice to anyone who gets in that situation, because it's painful, is just you're in an academic institution where you can go take whatever classes you have. You have quite a bit of flexibility. I just started going into law, economics, things that I was just interested in, instead of getting bogged down in PhD things. And eventually you'll find something that makes you click. I think that's my advice, but it's painful, and I empathize with that, whoever's going through that. Extremely painful.
Ariel, we had a question in the chat that was addressed to Scott.
Yeah.
And this is from Lynn Brown. Says, I wondered where the best places to find federal research jobs. And I think that's the emphasis, like on the research jobs in the federal system. Is this USA Jobs as well, or is there somewhere else someone should look?
I just answered on chat, but I'll say it. All federal jobs are advertised on USA Jobs. Most of the positions in research are also advertised where academic jobs are advertised in journals, websites, the Texas A&M site, places like that.
I've got a question for Sarah, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Sure.
Sarah, how'd you get good at asking for money? I mean, I love the way you said it, like you're giving people the opportunity to, I think that's the way you couched it, you're giving them the opportunity to express their values. But yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I will say I got involved in nonprofit organization. I was a board member back when I was doing my PhD, a million years ago, it seems like. I actually was an early board member on a group in Costa Rica where I was doing my PhD in Monteverde. Monteverde Conservation League still exists today, but I was one of the early board members way down there. And I got interested in nonprofit conservation work and management during my PhD work. And basically, and so I guess I've always, ever since then, I've been on nonprofit boards. And it is a big part of the nonprofit world is to be, and I've done training classes, I've done, some, I wouldn't say it's more informal training, like there's a, where I am, there's an annual kind of nonprofit partnership organization that does workshops and stuff for people. And so I've done some fundraising training through that type of thing. But I've learned about the field of finance. I've learned a lot about financial management, fundraising, development, all these things that are what make nonprofits work. Just because I believe in that nonprofits are a great way to do things. And I also think that, and because anyway, I'm not that academic. I did a PhD, I did a postdoc. And to answer the last question, I would say that I realized I was a lot happier doing things on the ground. I don't like giving lectures. I don't like teaching in a lecture format. I like teaching in an informal structure. And I like seeing things happen and making things happen. And so to me, that's very satisfying. And I felt like I was best able to do that through the nonprofit world. Fortunately, of course, I did marry somebody who's really good in academics and also earns a better living than I do. So you can do that as a partnership. That's good. But anyway, I guess I've done training on it. I do think it is something that a lot of people don't get training on. And I do think it is really valuable to understand that there are people with money who want to support this work, and being able to talk to them is important, is really good. Yeah.
We just got a question in the chat for those who might be willing to discuss this. Kind of the finances of different kinds of positions. So salary, benefits, time off, those kind of elements, if folks are comfortable. So Andrew?
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it because it's a matter of public record. Everything that any person that works for the state of Florida, their salary is published on the website. For Florida, for many state agencies, I think we are paid substantially less than our federal counterparts who are at comparative levels. I know that to be true in Florida anyway. And Florida, and I know some other states actually have two sort of employment classifications, one of which like myself as a full-time employee, and I get good benefit, great healthcare, good paid time off, really, I have a pension, which, a lot of it's more and more difficult to find. So there are good benefits. But we have a second class of employees that aren't considered full-time. They're considered temporary, even if they work 12 months a year, and they lack everything but healthcare, no paid leave, no sick leave, and things like that. So those are difficult positions, and having those two types of employment classes within an agency, it's not ideal because there's essentially two separate castes of employees, and it's difficult for folks who don't have the same benefits I do. I will get specific for you. For our scientists that work with me tend to make between $45,000 and $55,000 a year, and then our administrators, so people above me, tend to make between $75,000 and $90,000 a year, unless they're a division director, and they make more than that. So and we have a lot of people who spend a lot of time in the field working in our wildlife management areas. Those biologists have really fascinating jobs and make like $38,000 or $40,000 a year. Now, Florida is not an expensive place to live. We have no income tax, so those numbers are slightly less depressing than they sound, but they're not great. And again, the problem is that we still have high retention, and we still have high employee satisfaction, despite the fact that we don't pay anything. So there's not a ton of motivation to change our pay scale. So I hope that is a good, useful answer, but I'd be happy to talk to anyone further if they want more specifics. I think I'm glad someone asked, because it's a really important question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. Scott.
Andrew touched on this. In the federal system, we do get paid well. It's almost worth putting up with the bureaucracy. For federal research scientists, typically with a PhD, you start at a GS-12, which most places in the US starts at about $67,000 a year. And you can go up to, research grade scientists are unique in the federal system in that you can get promoted to higher grades without changing jobs. So as you advance in your career, you get evaluated periodically, and you can advance up to a GS-15. And within each grade, there are steps that has to do with how long you've been in that. So after a year at GS-12, you get moved to GS-12 step 2, which is a slight pay increase. So you could potentially at a step GS-15, step 10, you could be making 166K in most parts of the country. So it's comparable to a large university research professor salary. Federal service has great benefits, healthcare, options for dental and vision care, and lots of time off. More and more, as you have more seniority, it's based on how long you've been in the federal system. Every year I donate probably a month of vacation time to people who run out of sick leave. It's a system in the federal system, because I just don't take that much vacation time, partly because my job is so much fun, so it's all like a vacation. And also there's just so much vacation at my seniority, I can't use it. I never get anything done.
Thank you, Scott. Jenny.
I can never relate to those people that end up with use or lose vacation hours at the end of the year. I don't have any, I'm a federal employee, so everything that Scott just said applies to me too. But just to give you an idea, I am a joint venture coordinator. Joint venture coordinators generally are GS-13s. I am a GS-13, and I saw that Eula put a link in the chat where you can look up that pay grade scale. There's sort of like a flat base rate, and then there are different cost of living adjustments depending on where you're located in the country. There are other jobs with joint ventures. There are science coordinators and assistant coordinators that might be more GS-12, 13, GS-11, GS-12 type positions. There are also joint ventures that are nonprofits, but I would say generally the salaries tend to be relatively equivalent to the GS scale, even in the nonprofit world with joint ventures.
Thank you, Jenny. David.
I feel a little bit compelled to speak given the only for-profit private sector person here. So it it works completely differently in the private sector, very much less structured. And right now in the marketplace, no one knows where the right salary is because it's changing so fast. But I did want to say the key to the private sector, in my experience, is there's more flexibility in how you get compensated. So, for example, this year, my company, me as an owner as well, transitioned to what we call employee ownership. Where as part of the benefit for employees, every year we give employees ownership in the company. They don't pay for it, we give it. So the better the company does, the better the employees' benefits do. And there's a lot of other bonus abilities outside of salary, because nobody knows where the best salary is. It's just the marketplace is crazy right now. And so there's just a lot more flexibility in spot bonuses for performance and bonuses for profit sharing, all of that. And so I would say from the private sector perspective, what I'd like to say is competence is transparent. And there is a way, very creative ways to get compensated outside of base salary.
Super helpful. Thank you, David. I think there's a couple of different questions that have come in from YouTube. One of them is, when is the appropriate time to start looking for jobs while you're simultaneously trying to finish a graduate degree? Especially from the perspective that this person knows that federal hiring can take a while, but they also don't want to be jobless. Sure, we can all appreciate. Jenny?
I feel like, I don't know, it's good to start looking before you need the job, right? That's like a general rule, even if you're just looking at changing jobs. You know, it's nice to not feel the pressure of I have to have a job next week. I also think it's really important to finish your degree before you start working at a job, because it can be really easy to say, okay, they have agreed that I can spend 10 hours a week finishing my dissertation. But once you get into that new job, I suspect you'll find it's really difficult to make that happen. So if you can negotiate, if you can accept the job and then negotiate the start date, I would highly, highly recommend that. It's not a super helpful answer, I know, but.
A practical one though. So another question that came in was, for PhD students looking to shift gears for their postdoc or their career, do you have any recommendations on coursework to help the student be more competitive? For instance, if the person was doing neurobiology or behavior for their PhD. Go ahead, Andrew.
I don't think I've ever looked at anyone's coursework. It's, do they have the degree, and then do they have the systems expertise we're interested in, and then the other tools we're interested in, both in the office and in the field. So I'm not sure, at least for us, different coursework would do the trick.
David?
I would say use the coursework to get yourself introduced into how different fields view the world, right? It's, to Andrew's point, it's less about I took X class or I took X class. It's more about explaining, articulating that you understand that there are different ways to look at the world. And particularly in an industry where you have multiple stakeholders coming together, that you can understand and talk to each of those different viewpoints. And so to me, it's less about what course it is. It's more about what do you want to do, first off, outside of neurobiology and behavior, and then link that coursework to some narrative that you're learning and you're able to articulate.
I think that's all. Is there any questions in the chat we missed?
Not on this chat. I don't know if on the YouTube channel.
I think there's another one in the YouTube channel, but it was kind of answered, but I may read it if you want. Here, good afternoon. My name is Sam, and as a new aspiring bird lover, I am just wondering, besides degrees, what level or type of experience do you need in order to reach a career like yours?
Okay, so outside of a career, what kind of experience?
Mhm.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So for my job, I had to, I had worked for a long time as a environmental educator and a strategic communications person and an ornithologist and wildlife biologist in the field. And so it was, the combination of all the skills that I had learned over the course of working in those separate fields. But I had to talk a lot about my skills in building partnerships and facilitating conversations and having difficult discussions and working with people. That was really the skill that more than anything I needed to demonstrate. And working binationally, working with Mexico in my particular case, that I needed to demonstrate in order to be competitive for my current job.
So I think maybe that's the last one, and it's already 30 past. So
we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. I think this is really helpful for a lot of people.
Yes, very much so. Thank you so much to all the panelists. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And yeah, thanks everybody.
Panelists, you were wonderful, and Auriel, you were wonderful for moderating. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Hope everybody has a great weekend. Go see some birds.